Today's daf that we're going to learn is Pesachim daf Pei Gimel. Chodesh Tov to everyone. We're going to start with a quick review of yesterday. At the end of yesterday's daf, we saw in the Mishnah, there were two different cases in the Mishnah of a problem with the Korban Pesach. The first issue was Pesach sheyatzau shenitma yisaref miyad, has to be burnt immediately. If the Pesach leaves Jerusalem, the walls of Jerusalem, or becomes impure, has to be immediately burnt. But if there's not a problem with the korban itself, but there's a problem with the owners, either they became impure or they died, then it has to be burnt immediately still, or again, well, I should say it like this. According to Tanakama, to ubar tzurato, you wait. Okay, there's a debate, as we said, either you wait overnight, like Rashi says, or like others say, you have to wait till it actually becomes a little more disgusting and then you can burn it. But Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka said, no, you still burn it immediately, to which we brought up Rav Yosef, who tried to say this is only the machloket between them is after Zrika, but right, because the meat was already ra'oi l'achila, and then they have a debate. But if it was before Zrika, then and the meat was never valid at all, then everyone agrees that we burn it immediately. We changed that. We said, no, he's not. It's not true. We said Rav Yosef must have then said the reverse, which is machloket is specifically after Zrika. Okay, then what we'd see that Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka would say even after Zrika to ubar tzurato. If it happened before, everyone would agree to ubar tzurato. Everyone would agree you would burn. But if it was after, then 1 second, let me just make sure I have it right. Right. Then nismu la'achar Zrika. Let me just correct. Let's just read it inside. Machloket shenitmu lifnei Zrika. Sorry, my mistake. The machloket is specifically when it was before Zrika, okay? And then it's like a psul in the goof, and that's when they have a whole machloket. But after Zrika, everyone agrees that it needs ibor tzura, to which we said Rabbi Yochanan disagrees, and we even proved that Rabbi Yochanan disagreed because or that he's consistent within what he said, because he brought an opinion according to Rabbi Yosef, everyone would agree if the baalim became impure after, then it would need ibor tzura, you wouldn't be able to burn it immediately. And we see here this opinion that Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka and Rabbi Nechemiah say the same thing, and Rabbi Nechemiah basically proved from the Aaron story that you burn it immediately. So now you see, and the case of Aaron, remember he said it was aninut, which aninut is the korban was totally fine, and after Zrika there came this problem that they couldn't eat it. So therefore, we're going to assume that according to Rabbi Yochanan, the Rabbi Nechemiah and Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka both think that you burn it even though the korban was totally fine and only this psul of the baalim came in after, you still burn it. Whereas again, Tanakama will think not. But now they point out, so Rabbi Yochanan, how did we know that he was consistent within his opinion? Because he said that Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka and Rabbi Nechemiah both say the same thing, which is basically we can burn it anyway, right? Even though there was a psul to the owner and it happened after the Zrika, meaning the korban was totally fine, we still burn it immediately if the owners, there's some issue, they died, they became impure. To which Rabbah responds and says, Rabbah Mosif Rabbi Yossi Aglili, he said, there's someone you didn't put in that list of people who also say you burn it immediately if something happens to the owners. And I'm going to show you, even though Rabbi Yossi Aglili isn't really talking about the owners, but we'll see. So he says, I would add Rabbi Yossi Aglili to the list, and then we're going to have to explain why Rabbi Yochanan didn't add him to his list. So we're on like an aside now. Ditanyas, it says in a bright time. Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer, Kol ha'inyan kulo eino medaber ela. Okay, before we even move on, what's Kol ha'inyan kulo? We have to know what he's referring to. I brought it on the sheet also. If you look in the sheet, he's talking about the verse that we quoted yesterday. V'kol chatat asher yuvam midamal ol moed lechaper b'kodesh lo yecher ba'esh tisaref. Any sin offering. Okay, now here it gets tricky how you explain it. Yesterday, how did we explain it? A sin offering, remember we talked about the sin offerings where the blood is sprinkled on the outside altar, and there's offerings where the blood is sprinkled on the inner altar. There's two different types of sin offerings. The normal ones are done outside. So we explained yesterday that what did this verse mean? Any sin offering that's supposed to be done outside, asher yuval dama pnima, right, or el oel moed, which is pnima, the inner part. If you bring the blood into the oel moed, because also in the Mishkan, the big mizbeach was outside the Oel Moed. Lechaper b'kodesh, right? And you bring it in there as if you want to atone there, meaning you're going to bring the blood inside. Lo ye'achel, this is disqualified. It can't be eaten. Ba'esh chisaref, it has to be burnt. We're now going to read this pasuk according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili in an entirely different manner. So now let's read. Kol inyan kulo, meaning that verse is read entirely differently than you thought. Eino medaber ela beparim hanisrafim ubesirim hanisrafim, which are otherwise known as the chataot hapnimiyot. That verse is specifically talking about the ones that are generally brought inside, like the par helem davar shel tzibur, if the Sanhedrin teaches everybody some wrong halacha and then they all go, or there's the par of Yom Kippur, there's a bunch, the Shiur of the Kohen Gadol, who also, there's a bunch of these korbanot that are called the chataot hapnimiyot. It's talking about that. Now we have to entirely reread the pasuk, because what do you mean? You're supposed to bring the blood inside. So what do you mean if you bring the blood inside by Eish Yisaref? So they read this not as you mess something up. They read this as this is what you do with them. Now let's read it again with that in mind. Kol chatat asher yuva midama ol moed lechaper b'kodesh. Any chatat that you bring inside the ol moed that you're supposed to burn inside. Lo ye'achel. Now one of the differences between that and a regular chatat, the meat goes to the kohen. There's two major differences, and that's exactly what's going to appear in this verse. These don't get eaten at all, and ba'esh chisaref, we burn them in their entirety. We don't put them on the altar. They don't get nikrav, so to speak, burnt on the altar. No, they get burnt outside the temple. Okay, they bring them to this place and they burn them there. It's called the Beit HaSreifa, because that's where they burn them. They burn them in their entirety, and you can't eat them. So now we read this verse, and this verse basically means all of those that are done inside, that you brought the blood inside, can't be eaten, lo yachel, and ba'esh chisaref, they have to be burnt. So that's what we're going to read right now, and that's how he reads this. So it's talking about the parim and israfim, the sirim and israfim. And what's it trying to tell you? Lisrof psulehem abeit habira. Okay, they get burnt at the Beit HaSbira, whether they're disqualified or whether they're not disqualified, they get burnt in the Beit HaBira. V'litein lo taseh achilatam, and it's forbidden to eat them. Okay, so Amrula, and you can't eat them whether they're disqualified or whether they're not disqualified. Okay, but the first part is even if they're not disqualified, they get burnt. Amrulo, they said to him, so according to you, where do we learn the other halacha that we talked about? And this you should already know the answer. Where do we learn it? From the Aaron and Moshe interaction. Because remember, Amar Lahen, so what does he say to them? Remember when Moshe says, why did you burn it? Hein lohu v'adama ala kodesh pnima. It's not like you brought, right? And then which the rabbi said was really a question. Did you maybe bring the blood inside? Is that why you're burning it? Or the pshat, which is you didn't do that and therefore, right? And therefore you shouldn't have burned it. But if you had, you would have had to burn it. So we learn it from there. But the point is, now, what does this have to do with us? This wasn't the Ba'alim. We're looking for the topic that we're trying to find is if something happened to the owners after the blood was sprinkled and everything was done properly, then what will we say? Then you also have to burn it. It's not what it says here, but what do they say? Michlal di'inafik ihi inami ayil dama bisreifa, right? From here you learn if it gets taken out or you brought it in or things were done wrong, you burn it. And what do we learn from here? That what we're going to say, something we saw yesterday, which is according to Rabbah, we saw yesterday that dam is like the basar. If you remember, about 8 lines from the bottom, it had said, Zehaklal, they brought a question. If there's something wrong with the korban itself, it gets burnt immediately. But bidam ubibaalim, but if it's the blood or the owners, we're always going to be more lenient in those cases. So we're basically going to say that if this is the case for the blood, then it would be the same as for the offer, for the owners. So therefore, he says, if Rabbi Yossi Aglili says about the blood, it gets burnt, then obviously he's also going to say about the owners. And that's why he says, Rabbi Yossi Aglili is also with all the others, that's basically, if something happens to the owners, even after the korban, it would still have to be burnt, which disagrees with what we said with Rabbi Yosef. So Rabbi Yochanan, why didn't he agree with this? So he basically says, I don't like your comparison. Savar damu basar chadamilti bali milta achritai. Right? Where are you going to draw the line? There's meat on the one hand, there's the owners on the other, right? Because the meat is clearly psul in the guf of the korban. The owners is clearly not. It's something external, right? It's not the korban itself. What about the blood? So one opinion is to say the blood goes with the owners, because the blood is, it's true, the blood is a central part of the sacrifice because we put it on the altar, but theoretically it's not really part of the korban itself. The korban is the meat. Nothing happened to the meat. The other, Rabbi Yochanan, says, no, I don't think this goes with our opinion, because just because he says it by blood doesn't mean he'd say it by the owners, because the blood is part of the korban. It came from the animal. That's something different than the owners. Okay, so that's our debate in the first section. Now we're going to move on to a Mishnah. Ha'atzamot v'hagidim v'hanotal yisarfu b'shishasa. Okay, let's start with the last one. That's the easiest. Nota, you leave over the meat. You're supposed to eat it until chatzot of the night. If you leave it over, then you burn it. Pasuk says it explicitly, right? Whatever's left of the Korban Pesach, you burn in the morning. Okay, we'll get back to that verse and what exactly morning, etc. When do you burn it? So maybe we should say it right now. Shishasa, not, you would think the 15th, which is the next morning. But no, you burn it on the 16th, and we'll get to that at the end of the Shiur. Why don't we burn it on the 15th, right? The obvious answer is because the 15th is Yom Tov and we don't allow it. The question is, why don't we allow it? And we'll have 4 different answers. Why don't we say there's a mitzvah aseh to burn it? There's a mitzvah lo taseh to not do work on Yom Tov, but maybe the mitzvah aseh overrides the mitzvah lo taseh, and we're going to have 4 different answers as to why not. The Mishnah continues to say, and then I'll get back to the beginning, which I particularly ignored right now. So now we say, right, and not only that, but if, this doesn't really happen, but if the day of Tet Zayin, the 17th, were to fall on Shabbat, then you would actually even push it off another day, okay, because it doesn't override not Shabbat and not Yom Tov. So now we have to deal with Atzamot and Gidim, and I didn't want to deal with them too much because the Gemara is going to deal with them, but I'll tell you in a very minorly before we get to the Gemara, which basically tries to establish what do we mean by the bones and what do we mean by the Gidim. But what in fact is going on here is you have parts of the animal that are somewhat considered food, but not exactly considered food. They're sort of in between. They're enough considered food that when they're left, they're going to be notal and left over. But they're not enough considered food that you actually can't eat them. So why are they not in the category of, in the end, you're burning them because they're notar, they're left over. But they're listed separately because there's no way they can't become notar. They're going to have to become notar, and we're going to have to see why this is. Because for whatever reason, again, they're like this in between. If they were really food, you would eat them, right? You'd have to eat them. And if you don't eat them, then they become notar. But then that would just be the category of notar. So they have to be something that can't exactly be eaten, but is food. And okay, so we're going to have to figure out exactly what this is. So the first thing we're going to start with is a statement of Rabbi Yitzchak, which then we're going to say maybe this proves our Mishnah. Or maybe our Mishnah, I should say the reverse, our Mishnah can support what Rabbi Yitzchak said, because Rabbi Yitzchak said a Mora. Amar Meri Baravu, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Atzamot kodashim sheshimshu notar mitamim et hayadayim ho'il v'nasa basis l'davar ha'asur. First of all, I should just say already, when we say bones, what we mean is bones that have marrow inside, because you can eat the marrow. The marrow is food. So now if you have bones that are from sacrificial meat, now normally bones is nothing. A bone is not edible. It's not, right? A bone is just a bone. So you shouldn't really have to burn them or anything else. It shouldn't become notar because you don't eat a bone. But the point is that these bones have marrow inside. So if you have a bone of sacrificial meat, sheshimshu notar, it's served notar. What does it mean, serve or serviced or however you use that word? It functioned in a way that helped the notar. Okay, what would that be? This is like in Masechet Uktzim, which is the last Masechet in Shas. It's all about like a handle of a pot or a handle of something that became, or a handle of a branch of a leaf that became, or something, right? Is it considered the same as that or not? Okay, do we view it since it serves it? So view it. Okay, I saw your question, Tova, about the bones. That's going to be the whole issue. So hold off on that. So now they're going to say like this: if you have a bone that basically helped the marrow, okay, and yes, all bones have marrow, but we're going to see maybe the marrow was removed. Okay, that's possible. So if bones, hold off on all these questions because nothing should be very clear yet. Okay, we're going to get to everything. So if there's marrow in them and the marrow became notar, so what would be a case where it wouldn't be? Let's say you sucked out all the marrow or broke the bone, took out the marrow. before it became notal. Okay, that would be a case where it wasn't shimesh notal. But if it was shimesh notar, meaning you left over the marrow beyond the time that you were allowed to, then, okay, now you have to know one other halacha, which is the rabbis decreed on a whole bunch of things. We've learned this before, and also on notar. They wanted to make sure that people were very careful about notar. So what they say, especially since notar takes place in the temple, they said if you touch notar, your hands are going to be impure. A level of sheni letuma, which means that if you touch truma or sacrificial meat, you're going to make it impure. So they said, if you have notar meat and you touch it, you're going to become impure. Your hands, just your hands, not your body. This is a unique type of tuma where just your hands become tamei. We've seen this before. Notar is matame yadayim. So came Rabbi Yitzchak and he said, not only the meat of notar, also a bone that had marrow in it that was notar. Okay, that's what he says. Why is this? This is a term we know from muktzah, right? It's let's say the candelabra, you have a tray and you got your candles on it. It becomes a basis. You can't move it also because it's serving something that's forbidden. It's also used here. Since the bones are kind of a base for something that's forbidden, they themselves have the same status, which would mean what? You'd have to burn the bones. So they say, oh, perfect. This must be what our Mishnah is talking about. So let's go and let's see how. What kind of case are we talking about in the bones? If there's no marrow in them anymore and the marrow never became notar, it wasn't left over because you ate it or you took it out, you broke the bones and took out the marrow. Remember, right now we're talking about Pesach, so hold off on that. Lama b'sreifa nashdinhu, right? Why would they need to be burned, right? Maybe you have a bone or even that never had marrow in it. So we should just throw it out. You don't need to burn it. You only need to burn meat that became notar. It must be there was marrow. Now, now, why would these bones need to be burned? Because they had marrow in them, right? If you're going to say that the bones that had marrow that became notar, and that means the bones are an issue, right? That they're also need to be burned. They are considered like notar, even though they themselves don't have, right? The bone itself isn't meat. That's why it needs streifa. But iyamar shimush notar lav miltahi. But if you say that notar is not something that serves notar, does not become notar. Okay, we're trying to basically prove Rabbi Yitzchak who said it is. So we're going to show by process of elimination. You can't say it's not. Why? Lama lahu sreifa. Nitabrinu v'nechlitze l'moach titeh v'nisrape v'nashtinu liditu. What could you do? You're standing there on Tet Vav in the morning, Tet Zayin in the morning, the 16th. You have these bones that have marrow in them. Now, what's the idea? You want to save your money. We talked about this yesterday with the person who want to take his wood to use to burn. You don't want to have to make a big fire. You want to make something small. All you need to do is burn the marrow. So what do? You break the bones. Now, we learned there's no shvirat etzem. You can't break the bones. But in this case, you could break the bones because it's already disqualified. You can break the bones in disqualified meat. We're going to talk about that. It's going to be a big topic tomorrow. But basically, they say just break the bones, take out the moach, burn the moach, which is much quicker to burn. And think about burning bones. It takes a little while. Don't burn your bones. Just throw them in the garbage. So it must be the fact that they say atzamot. Number one, it must be atzamot with the marrow. Number two, it must be that the bones themselves are problematic also because they were mishamish notar, as Rabbi Yitzchak says. So there's our proof. And therefore, elalav shmamina shimush notar milti. So it must be something that serves notar becomes notar. So they now want to reject this and say, you can't necessarily prove it from our Mishnah. Why? You could say that shimush of notar isn't really anything. So then why are you burning the bones? Because what? Kasaval bo. Okay, bo is the verse. We actually saw this drasha before. We saw the opposite of this drasha. We're going to see the opposite of it tomorrow also. It says, etzem lo tishberu bo. You can't break the bones. Okay, so now they're going to say, bikasher v'afilu b'pasul. Not only in a kosher, it says bo. Bo usually is exclusive in that korban. But now they're going to say no. And we're going to learn tomorrow that bo, general, is to say bo lo b'pasul. Once it's disqualified, there's no problem of etzem lo tishberu bo. But we're going to say that our Mishnah that says the bones have to be burnt must hold even once it's disqualified, you still can't break the bones. Okay, so bo v'kasher afilu b'pasul. Okay, and that must be, this Tana must hold that. Okay, which is kind of radical, especially when we see tomorrow's daf, where we're going to get much more in depth into breaking bones. There, the Mishnah, there are the opinions. There are two opinions, but it seems like everybody agrees bo v'lo b'pasul, and it's just, do we even add more cases where etzem lo tishburo is not relevant? If you remember, we also had, maybe we used this drasha. We were talking about etzem lo tishburo by chagigat yudalid. Remember the korbanot chagiga, is etzem relevant or not? Do we say lo b'pasul, or do we say lo bo and something else, a different drasha, right? And lo b'chagigat yudalid. Anyway, we're going to say that, which means that you can't necessarily learn it from our Mishnah. So then they say, wait a minute. Afilu b'pasul sakadatach? You really think that it's forbidden to break bones even in a disqualified Pesach korban? V'hatnan, it says in the Mishnah, and this is the Mishnah we're going to see tomorrow, aval hamotil b'tahol. Okay, this is a different topic, which we'll see tomorrow, which is if you leave over the meat, okay, in a perfect korban, or hashover b'tamei, or you break a bone in a disqualified korban, one that became impure, eino sofeget ha'arba'im, you don't get lashes. So it seems like it's not a problem. Okay, we'll see why tomorrow, why you don't get it for nota. So anyway, they say, oh, don't worry about that Mishnah, contradicting our Mishnah. They're each talking about different situations. Lo kashya, kan shaitalo shata kosher, kan shelo haitalo shata kosher. If it was valid at some point, then it's going to have a problem. That's like our Mishnah. It was valid and then became notal, but it had a time where you could eat it. Then etzem lo tishburo is going to continue. But lo haitalo shata kosher, if it became tamei before it ever was ra'oi to eat, then it won't have an issue of etzem lo tishburo. Okay, and that's how you explain our Mishnah versus that Mishnah. Again, trying to say that our Mishnah doesn't necessarily prove Rabbi Yitzchak. Uman Tana. Now, just as an aside, before we get back to the next thing, which is, who's the Tana? Deshane lebein shaitalo shata kosher lelo shaitalo shata kosher. Where do you know that there's this distinction with this law of etzem lo tishburo being relevant to a korban that's disqualified from the get-go, or at least like some part of the process, versus one that was actually totally fine and only became disqualified later? So how do you know there's a difference? Well, Rabbi Yaakov, okay, that's Rabbi Yaakov who holds that we make this distinction. How do we know this? And now it looks like there's three opinions in this source, but it's really, one is the topic sentence, and the next two are how to explain the topic sentence. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense, because then number one actually seems to match number three. So let's read it like this. Etzem lo tishburo bo, the quote, the verse, bo, b'kasher v'lo b'pasul. What are we talking about? Only if it's a kosher sacrifice and not one that was disqualified. So now we're going to explain what that is coming to exclude. Rabbi Yaakov omer, haytalo shata kosher v'nifsal yesh bo mishum shvirat ha'etzem. Only if it was totally valid and then became invalid down the way, then it's going to have a problem with shvirat etzem. But lo haytalo shata kosher, if it was never good, then ein bo mishum shvirat ha'etzem. So again, the upcoming Mishnah, which says you don't get lashes, it's because it was disqualified early on. Ours is going to be a problem because it's disqualified now. You know, it was disqualified only later. Rabbi Shimon disagrees. And again, this is Rabbi Yaakov we brought to show that there is this distinction in terms of the forbidden issue of breaking bones. Okay, tomorrow I go much more in depth into this. We'll talk about the Rambam versus the Sefer HaChinuch as to what's the reason for breaking bones. Okay, so there's a lot more to it in tomorrow's daf. I don't want to get into everything today because that's tomorrow. Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Shimon says, I don't care why it's disqualified. If it's notar, if it was disqualified early on, later on, it doesn't make a difference. It's always going to have a problem with shvirat etzem. You can never break the bone. Okay, so again, what did we do so far? We brought Rabbi Yitzchak, who said, if a bone serves notar, it's going to have the same laws of notar. We tried to prove it from our Mishnah that must be the case of our bones that were burning, because we're not breaking them, right? And otherwise, you could have broken them and taken it out. It must be, even if you break them, it doesn't matter. You still have to burn the bones. And then we said, no, it could be you can't break the bone. And that's why we're going to burn the bones, because what's the issue? Maybe I didn't actually say this clearly enough. I'll say it very clearly right now. These bones, we're now back to the beginning. This has to be a case where it's automatically going to become notal, because you can't get the marrow out because you're not allowed to break the bones during the time when you can eat it. So you're stuck. You can't break the bone. you then end up, it becomes notal and you'll have to burn it. Okay. And then you're burning it because you can't break the bones, not because if you theoretically could have broken the bones, you wouldn't have to burn the bones. Okay. And then it doesn't prove Rabbi Yitzchak at all because it's saying the bones themselves are not a problem. According to Rabbi Yitzchak, you'd have to burn the bones because the bones themselves served notal and therefore they themselves become notal. Okay, now we're going to a question against Rabbi Yitzchak, a source that seems to contradict. Meitive, kol atzamot hakodashim ein tu'unim schrefa, chutz mi atzamot haPesach mipnei hatakala. This Braita makes a distinction between regular bones and Pesach bones, which obviously is because of this issue of breaking bones. So any bones that are from regular sacrificial meat don't need to be burned, but Pesach, they need to be burned mipnei takala because it will lead us to a problem. So, hane atzamot hechidami. So again, we're going to say, what's the issue here? If they don't have any marrow in them, then lamalu sreifa, then they certainly don't need to be burned. Again, let's assume you sucked out the marrow already. It must be talking about it has moach in them. And then, now again, we're assuming this must be talking about bones that are notar, that are left over beyond the designated time. The isal kadata shimush notar miltehi, if you're going to say that serving notar is considered something, well then, and that would explain the Pesach, right? That's why you can't do it. But it doesn't make sense with the atzmot kodashim. Amai ein tu'unim srefa? Why, if any bone that serves notar is a problem, why are bones of regular sacrifices not going to need to be burned? They should be. And that seems to contradict Rabbi Yitzchak. So we're going to have two answers. Each one is what we call an ukimta, where we say clearly that source was talking about a particular case. Okay, what's the case? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, kacha b'may askinan, kigon shemitza'an chalutzim. You find these bones on the morning after you were allowed to eat the sacrifice. So now it's notal. And you find them broken, and there's no marrow in them. The problem is you don't know when was the marrow taken out. If the marrow was taken out before it became notal, then your bones are nothing. If the marrow was taken out after, then it's a problem because your bones serve notar. Again, this is all according to Rabbi Yitzchak. We want to make this work according to Rabbi Yitzchak. So now we're going to explain why we would distinguish between, this is all the classic rabbinic game of what's the probability, right? It's a probability game. If you find bones of regular sacrifices beyond the designated time, what can you assume? And there's no marrow in them. So atzmot kodashim, there's no problem to break bones. So therefore we assume you probably took out the marrow beforehand. One can assume that before it became notar, you already took out the marrow because you wanted to make sure it wasn't notar and you were able to do that. So then it doesn't ever become, it never served notar. And that's why these bones, lo ba'isreifa, you just throw them out. Atzmot Pesach, but obviously Atzmot Pesach. Now the question is Atzmot Pesach, why are they now broken and there's no marrow in them? But we don't know what happened. But you can assume that since it's forbidden to break the bones, then yesh b'hem mishum shvirat ha'etzem, because it's forbidden, libatar din havu notar hu dechatzinu, you can assume that it was only after it was notar that the marrow was taken out. And that might fit in with bova lo b'pasul, right? There's no problem to break bones once they're disqualified. And therefore you can assume that even though now there's no marrow, they must have served marrow, but again, not served but they functioned to help the marrow at some point by holding it in place. And therefore, ba'us reifa, it needs to be burned. Rav Zvi Amar, he gives a little bit more of a again, we're going farther into what kind of case this could be. Rav Zvi Amar, hacha b'may askinan, kigon shemitza'an sfulin umehen chalutzin. What happened? You found a big pile of bones. The top ones are broken and there's no marrow in them. So the question is, can we make an assumption about the ones underneath? Now you have to assume that it's, and some explain, the Korban has a footnote about it, that it's obviously very complicated to check all the bones. And we don't necessarily make you do that. The question is, we can make assumptions based on the few that we see about the rest. Okay. Now, if you actually check them, then we go by what you actually checked. But in Jewish law, they often give you an opportunity to not have to always go through a big process and check everything, but we can make assumptions. So again, our assumptions are going to be different if it's regular sacrifices versus Pesach, and that all has to do with breaking bones. So atzmot kodashim de'ein behem mishum shvirata etzem lekulu avachalitzu va'achalu v'lo ba'isreifa. Again, this is one can assume. It doesn't say those words here, but that's what it obviously means. If you have a big pile and the ones at the top are broken and there's no marrow in them, and it's from a regular sacrifice where there's no problem to break the bones, one can easily make an assumption. It must be that the rest of them were also broken. And we have this big pile of broken bones that the marrow was taken out of. Apparently, it might be hard to figure out whether the marrow is inside or not. And because of that, we don't make you try to determine it because it's not so easy to determine. So we can just assume. But atzmot Pesach, if you see a few broken ones, you can't make an assumption that the rest are broken. And therefore, v'yesh behem mishum shvirata etzem, since it's forbidden to break the bone, therefore, even though you see some without marrow, you can assume that only those are without marrow, but the rest probably do have marrow in them. Now, why you broke some of them, we don't know, but you can assume that they all need to be burned. Okay, all the ones that we don't know about. So that's two different explanations that show that you still could hold the bones that had marrow, there was no tar in them, you have to burn them. And this was just a little bit different because it wasn't the case where it actually had marrow. It was a matter of, did we assume that the marrow, right now it doesn't have marrow. Can we assume it had marrow that was no tar in it or didn't, or the marrow was taken out previously? So again, each time we're going to assume if it's regular sacrifices and there's no problem to break bones, they probably broke the bones before and took the marrow out. With the Pesach, not. Okay, that was all. So again, what we did so far today is, first thing was we took this issue of Rabbah, who added Rabbi Yosef Glili to that list we saw. Then we went into this Mishnah, which we're trying to explain what the atzamot are. We didn't deal yet with the gidim. We're going to get to that right now. The notar was obvious. The notar gets burnt on Tet Zayin. I told you we're still left with at the end of the daf. Why can't we do it on Tet Vav, on Yantif? Then we said, what are the atzamot? We're going to assume they're atzamot that have, right? We took the statement of Rabbi Yitzchak and tried to say maybe our Mishnah either proves or doesn't prove Rabbi Yitzchak. In the end, we couldn't say either which way. It could go both ways, that either our Mishnah is talking about because they function to help to hold in the moach, the notar, right? Or one could explain it that they either shimush notal, or you can assume that they broke, that they couldn't break the bones and they couldn't get it's not that, it's that they obviously are going to always have notar in them because there's no way to break the bones even after. And that would be, you'd have to hold that even bipasul, you can't break the bones, which, as I told you, we're going to see tomorrow, it's a not the common opinion, but one could potentially read our Mishnah that way. So either it has the marrow in them, or because it's served, right? And then because of the marrow, you have to burn it because there's no way to get the marrow out. Or you say there is a way to get the marrow out, but it doesn't matter. The bones have to be burnt anyway because they had notar in them at some point. Because even if you say you could break the bones, you can only break them once they become notar. So the bones are always going to be a problem. Now we're going to try to understand the gidim. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. And this also relates to the next Mishnah. The next Mishnah I should just tell you, which is this Mishnah that says, there's parts of, if you remember the Korban Pesach we used a very young animal. Now there's certain things in young animals that are soft that harden over time. So the Mishnah, tomorrow's daf is going to say that if you can eat it in a larger animal, and even if it's a part that won't harden later, then you can eat it in the Korban Pesach. It's considered meat. And then you can be part of a Korban Pesach and say, that's the part that I'm going to eat, right? Because remember, they had to make sure everyone got a kazayit. But if it's a part that can't be eaten with the animal as it gets older and it hardens, then even now you can't eat it. So now we're going to have a little bit of a problem because gidim are sinews and they're not really so edible. So we're going to talk about this. So again, our Mishnah is going to have to assume, again, it's a little bit of a tricky thing. We're going to have to find something that's not really food or can't be eaten, but it has to be food because if it's not food, it's not going to be notal. So we have to find some in between, just like we did with the bones. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Kol hagidin basal. All sinews are considered meat. Chutz migidei tzavar. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to bring someone else's statement and then try to match it up with our Mishnah, except for the gidim in the neck. Those are very thick and hard, and they get hard and they're not edible. Tanan. So they say, wait a minute, that contradicts our Mishnah. Why? Kol atzamot gidim vanotar yisarfu b'tet zayin. Hani gidim hechidami. So again, what sinews are we talking about in our Mishnah? If they're gidei basar, what did Rav say? That's meat. Well, if that's meat, then you should have eaten them before they became notar. And if you didn't, then they're notar. They don't need to be listed separately here. So ilema gidei basar nichlinu, right? Eat them. V'idi totar, and if you leave them over beyond the given time, hainu notar. They don't need their own special mention in the Mishnah. Ela pshita, it must be gidei tzaval, which is then going to raise a contradiction on Rav, because Rav said gidei basar are not gidei tzavar. The gidim in the neck is not edible. So Iyamar Bishlama Basar Ninu. Now we're going to say then that must be the one in our Mishnah. Now it is edible, because if it's basal amtulahachi by streifa, if it's meat, that's why it needs to be burnt. Ella Iyamar Lav Basar Ninu Lamalu streifa. But if you say it's not meat, then you don't need to burn it. So it doesn't make any sense according to Rav. It must be it is meat, and then you burn it. But now we're going to say, Amar Rav Chisda, Lo nitzracha, and I see, Becky, this is what you wrote, Lo nitzracha ela legida nasheh. We're going to say, oh no. The gidim are not the gidei tzavar. Gidei tzavar are not edible. They're not the regular gidim, because the regular sinews are edible. So we're not talking about that. We're not talking about that, because if they're edible, it would be notar. If they're not edible, they wouldn't be would be a problem. They would be listed in our Mishnah. They wouldn't need burning. So it must be the gida nasheh, which is forbidden to eat. But now, okay, if it's forbidden to eat, then it's not notal. So you'd have to find some in between. We're going to have a few different answers here. Rav Chisda says it's the gida nasheh and aliba de Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Titanya, as it says in a Braita, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Eino noheg ela be'echat. The gida nasheh is only one. There's a right gid and a left gid. Okay, this is the sciatic nerve. So there's one on the right side, one on the left, and the gida nasheh is only in one of them. V'adat machat shel yamin. And it seems to be, let's put it that way, or it is, okay, like if we're going to choose one, it's obviously going to be the right. Why would it be only one? Because that's where Yaakov got hurt on one side. We're going to assume it was the right. So now they say, wait a minute. So if it's the right, then this doesn't make any sense either. Again, the right one wouldn't be a problem. The left one would have to be eaten. If not, it would be notal. So they're saying, according to what you're saying, you would have to assume Ela tifshot, and this is going to knock out his opinion. Sifuke misapka leila Rabbi Yehuda. Are you saying that Rabbi Yehuda wasn't sure which one it was? If he knew for sure it was the right one, then the right one wouldn't be eaten, and you would just throw that out. And the left one would have to be eaten, and if it wasn't, it was notar, which again means that can't be our Mishnah. So lama le streifa, right? You could just throw out the right one. So basically, he's saying, are you trying to say that Rabbi Yehuda isn't sure which one? And that's why now, if he's not sure, then what would happen? We would say, you can't eat either one, because it might be the gida nasheh, which is forbidden to eat. And then we'd say, then it's going to automatically become notar. That would make perfect sense. Except what's the problem? Rabbi Yehuda said, hadam achrat shel yamin, which basically means it's clear it's the right. He wasn't in doubt about it. So we're knocking out that opinion. So now we're going to have three other opinions, a gida nasheh, but a little bit different than we said. Amarav Ika Brachinina, Kigon Shehuklu Ulevasof Nitarvu. Now, this is what we call a very rare ukimta. It's to say that when the Mishnah said gidim, what did it mean? It meant in a unique case where you cut up the meat, you had the gid of the right and the gid of the left. Now, the gid of the right doesn't look very different from the gid on the left side once you cut it off the body. And then they got mixed up and you didn't know which was which. In that case, they're going to automatically become notar, because you can't eat either one of them, because maybe it's the one that's forbidden. And then we don't know, right? And then it automatically becomes notar. And then we basically say that when the Mishnah said gidim, it meant not just all gidim, it meant only the gid and nasheh. It meant only in a case where the right and the left got mixed up, but we don't know which is which. Wow, that's a little already out there. But, that happens in Mishnayot. Rav Ashi Amar lo nisracha ela lishum no de gid nasheh. It isn't actually talking about the gid. The gid is on the right. We're not worried you're going to confuse them. That's not the case in the Mishnah anyway. The Mishnah is talking about the fat of the gid nasheh. And now something fascinating comes out. Titanya shum no mutal. The fat is permitted. V'Yisrael kadoshim hem v'noagim bo isu. But the Jews decided we're going to be extra careful. We don't want to get anywhere near the gid nasheh. We're going to forbid this. Okay, that's not so fascinating. Fine, that happens a lot. But what's fascinating about this? What's the Mishnah telling us? Because the Jews stopped eating the fat of the gid nasheh, it's just a minhag, a custom. When it comes to the Korban Pesach, you're not allowed to eat it, and it's going to automatically become notal. We're going to take a minhag, and through that, because we're upkeeping the minhag, we're now going to create a situation of notal, which is forbidden by the Torah. So it's this fascinating idea that how strong minhagim are that they don't say, oh, look, this is Korban Pesach, you have to eat it, you can't leave over the meat, eat the shuman anyway. No, this became a custom, and because of that, the fat of the gid and ashet is always going to be notar, and that's what the Mishnah is telling us. Ravina Amar, similar vein, but it's not a custom. Here he's going to say it's forbidden by rabbinic law. Bechitzon, okay, there's an inner sciatic nerve and an outer sciatic nerve. And ukidivrei Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, and like Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, and as our Mishnah is talking about the gid and ashet, the outer one, the outer sciatic nerve. Ta'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Shnei gidim hem pnimia samuch le'etzem, the inner one that's right near the bone. Asur v'chayavim alav. It's forbidden by Torah law, basically. Chayavim means you're going to get lashes if you eat it. Chitzon asamuch lebasar, but the outer one that's near the meat, asur ve'ein chayavim alav. It's forbidden, but you're not going to get lashes for it. So now, again, what are we going to say? It's the same idea, but it's a little bit stronger because it's forbidden by rabbinic law. But because the rabbis forbade the outer sciatic nerve, even though you don't get lashes for it, now when it comes to Pesach, you don't eat that. You can't eat it because it's forbidden by rabbinic law, but which is going to end up making you transgress a Torah law of notal. So it's very fascinating. The main thing I could say to support this kind of understanding is, besides saying it shows how strong minhag is and how strong isurei d'Rabbanan are, right? If we start permitting it, then people might permit it in other cases also. But I think it's also the issue that notal already has a bit of a different nature to it, which is, and we'll get to this tomorrow, it's shev al tase. We don't do anything. It's not like you're transgressing intentionally by doing an action. You're just not eating something. So you're refraining from doing something. It's got a bit of a different nature than actively going against a law. Okay, last part for today, Chal Tetzayin. What happens if Tetzayin ends up on Shabbat? And also obviously every time on Tet Vav, it doesn't override Yom Tov. You push it off another day. So Amai. Nete aseh v'yitchelot aseh. As I said before, why don't you say there's an aseh to eat the meat? You have to eat the meat in its designated time. And maybe that should, the aseh of burning the meat, and it's when you're supposed to burn it. Why doesn't that override, right? When you leave it over to the next day, you have to burn it. So why doesn't that override the forbidden lo taseh melacha, don't do work? So we're going to have 4 different answers. Amar Chizkiah, v'chein tana debe Chizkiah. I think it's, 1 second, is it? Yeah, 4 answers. Chizkiah, v'chein tana debe Chizkiah. Also in his house, they brought this braita. Amalcha, the pasuk says, and we've seen this before, lo tutiru mimenu ad boker. Don't leave it over till the morning. V'hanotang mimenu ad boker ba'esh tisrofu. And anything you leave over to the morning, burn. Now there's something repeated in this verse. What is it? Ad boker. It could just say, don't leave it till the morning, and anything you leave is burn in fire. She'ein tamud lo, you don't need the second ad boker. So she'ein tamud lo mar ad boker, it's unnecessary. So ma tamud lo mar ad boker, why does it say it? Litain lo boker sheni l'sreifato. It's to tell you, you have to push it off till the next morning. Okay, so they're basically saying, Torah decree, do it on Tetzayin. You don't need to start asking me other questions because that's what it says. What we call Gzerat HaKatuv. Abai says a different pasuk. Amarcha olat Shabbat b'Shabbato. You bring each Shabbat the sacrifice of that day. What did we learn from this? Also, we learned this before. Lo olat chol b'Shabbat, but lo olat chol b'Yom Tov. You can't do a daily sacrifice on a holiday or on a Shabbat. So therefore, this is like a daily thing, right? It also comes from a sacrifice that was done not on the holiday. So we don't allow that to override. Only things that have to be done that day. Rava Amarcha. What's the heter on Yom Tov? Okay, let's ignore the Shabbat issue, but let's say on Yom Tov, at least maybe on Tevav, in the morning, you should be able to burn it. Ochal nefesh is allowed. So what do we learn about the Ochal nefesh pasuk? What you could do for food? It says this only. So what's this and what's only coming to exclude? This, hu v'lo machshirav, not anything that could have been taken care of before. Livado v'lo milah shelo bizmana haba mikal v'chomer. Okay, I'm not going to get into this whole kal v'chomer. We'll look at the Masechet Shabbat. It's a little bit complicated, too much to say, certainly at the end of the page. But there's a kal v'chomer from tzara'at and avodah, and which is docher, and which thing that you can do a brit milah even if you have tzara'at, and you could, this long-winded thing. They said that theoretically, you could even learn that a milah, not in its appropriate time, meaning if you missed the 8th day, you might have thought it would override Yom Tov. comes to tell you, livado, this only, nothing else. Amila shelo bizmana, if you're Brit Milah, you missed the day, you cannot do it on Yom Tov. And all the more so not on Shabbat. So they come and they say, from here we can derive, now there's a bit of a jump, but also notar is not, Amila shelo bizmana now has no more designated time. Likewise, notar doesn't have a designated time. It's true, you're supposed to burn in the morning, but it just means once you've left it over, take care of burning it. It doesn't have to be done today, so therefore we push it off. And last answer, Rav Ashi Amar Shabbaton de Yom Tov Asehu, ve'ein aseh dochelot aseh ve'aseh. This is very common. He's taking a rule from other cases. We generally say an aseh can override a lot aseh. However, like the aseh of Brit Milah can override, don't cut a negat sarat, okay? But the aseh of Milah can override it. But it can't override it, an aseh doesn't override when there's something stronger on the other side, when you have an aseh and a lot aseh. And Yom Tov is both don't do work, and you should do a Shabbaton, a rest, right? Keep it a Shabbat. So it's got an aseh and a lot aseh, and that's stronger than the aseh of burning, and that's why it doesn't override Yom Tov. With that, we will stop here for today. Shabbat Shalom and Chodesh Tov to everyone.